Hey guys, how you doing? I'm going to give you a little tutorial on how to do an Uncaged Ultra Boost. This is an older pair that I have, and I just figured, they're starting to get dirty, wear down a little bit, maybe try something different. As you can see, I already did one of the shoes. It actually turned out pretty well. There are a little bit of touch-up things that I'm going to do, and I'm also going to black out the midsoles. I just have to wait for the dye and the paint to come. I did this all with a soldering iron and a steak knife just to cut the stitching. As you can see down here, it's a little crude, but at the same time, all I need is a little bit of sandpaper and I'll clean all that up. It's actually not that noticeable, and I feel that once I do sand it and once I do touch up everything with a little bit of that matte black paint, then it'll look really well done and professional. And essentially what I did for the lacing was I used the soldering iron that I have. It's actually a cordless one. It's battery powered, has a little flashlight at the top so you know where you're going. And I just used the stock eyelets that are already on the cage and then poked through them and then poked a hole on top where the border is up here. That way you have the inlet and the outlet, and then you can go up to the next row and then in and out and in and out. Something a little different that I had to do though whenever I got to the top, so I didn't want to burn into the mesh. I had to go below instead of over because it just wasn't going to look right. Alright, I guess let's get started. Now, like I said, first thing you want to do is you want to poke a hole right through. And it takes a second just to get the soldering iron to go through. But as you can see, once it goes through pretty clean. I'm actually going to set this down for a second so I can pull this out of the cage. Alright. And the next hole that you want to do is right above. Now, I don't know if all pairs of Ultra Boosts are like this, but you have little squares of the weaving where you can kind of see it's divided into thirds. Poke through the one right above the hole, right here. See where I'm kind of circling? You want to go through that one. And you want to do that on every eyelet, that way it stays consistent. Just poke the hole through, and there you go, 2 clean holes. Now, what I did on the first pair, and what I'm going to stick to do on this pair as well, I want to do one side at a time, and then cut the cage, and then go to the other side. That way you don't go all over the place. Now, I'm just going to continue doing it on this side, and then I'll show you how to remove the cage. Alright guys, I'm back. As you can see, I did do those holes right there. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the cage, and then that way we can cut the next hole that goes under this one right here. What you have to do is you have to pull back the cage, and then you're going to start to see where the seam is. It goes pretty much the whole way from, I'd say, about 3/4 of the way down to the sole. And all I did was pull it back a little bit, get your steak knife, or any other knife that you have. You can use an X-Acto. You can do whatever you want, actually. And then just press up against the cage. That way you're not cutting any of the prime knit and not snagging it, making it look all nasty. And then you just keep going back and forth on top of the seam until you go the whole way down. As you can see, this is something that you have to be patient with because you don't want to screw it up. And at the same time, you don't want to go too slow, as you're just not going to make any progress at all. Let me see if I can get this camera to focus a little bit better. And as you can probably tell, I am filming this with my phone, so sorry if the quality isn't as good. I feel like you guys probably got the gist of this, so if it keeps cutting out a little bit, I'm just going to set the camera down and do it, and then come back and show you guys the finished product. Alright guys, I'm back again. As you can see, these probably haven't been cleaned in a while, and under the cage you can see where some dust is. You can definitely see it more on this one over here. These are definitely a shoe that along the seam, if you are going to plan on doing this, either if your shoe's already worn, you're going to want to clean it up. Probably not right afterward, but whenever you finish up this, at least this far in the process. Some trick that I actually heard was these are actually washer safe. You just got to throw them in a pillowcase, and then I think can't leave them in there for too long, but it'll clean them up really good. I've heard that it actually goes back to almost dead stock looking. I don't know if that's true or not because I haven't actually done it myself, but maybe I'll do a tutorial on that as well. Now, as you can see, now that the seam's all completely gone, it's pretty much the whole way down into the midsole and then into the heel shank over here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to poke this hole right here. And you might ask, well, why didn't you do that whenever you were doing the other ones? Well, whenever the seam is there, it's really tricky to pull back and keep it there. I guess it really doesn't matter all too much because you're going to end up taking the cage off anyway, so who cares if it melts, but it's a little harder to do one-handed, as you can probably imagine. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do that one, and it's going to be like the same principle. You're going to want like one of these holes in between the top eyelet and the bottom eyelet. So I'm going to do that, and I'll get right back. Alright guys, we're back. You just poke this second hole. And another thing too, if you're going to use a soldering iron, it's going to melt a little bit. So you might want to, I don't really know exactly how you would want to clean it up, but it definitely gets covered well by the laces, as you can tell. You can't even really see any of the burn marks. Now, I do plan on getting like the Yeezy Boost 350 laces. That way it's going to look a little different, and then it's definitely going to look a little bit better whenever I black out the midsole, because those laces are pretty much all black with some sort of gray and red pattern on them. Another thing too that you might want to look out for, whenever you're done cutting the seams, this is really flexible, which is also kind of an advantage. Whenever I did it on this one, as you can see, and as I've told you before, I did do all this with a soldering iron, which is actually the next step in which we're going to do right now. Make sure your soldering iron's hot. And what I did was I pretty much just traced along the cage, the whole way down, up and around the heel shank, make it one nice fluid motion. That's why it doesn't look overly scrappy here, but at the same time you can kind of tell that, you know, it is just melted plastic. This is something that you want to take your time on, because you definitely don't want the shoe looking like total crap whenever you're done. What I started doing was I just kept tracing back and forth a couple of times, let it melt slowly. That way it wasn't poking through to the prime knit, but at the same time it wasn't not making any progress, if that makes sense. It is definitely, like I said before, something you want to take your time on because you don't want to screw it up. And then it's going to be like the same process on the other side. The only difference is the shape on the other side. It's not exactly the same. It's more flat to a peak, as you can kind of see down here. Then it drops and then keeps going over. Over here, it's almost more like a one foul swoop kind of thing. And I'm going to shut the camera off right now, do this, and then whenever we get to the final part of the process, I'll start recording again. Alright guys, I'm back once again. As you can see, I started to remove the cage a little bit, and as the process goes, you really just kind of want to get the soldering iron in between where you started making the groove and peel up a little bit. That way, while you're pulling it up and this is and the soldering iron is heating the plastic, what you're doing is essentially you're separating it with as little chance of hitting the prime knit as possible, because that's just going to make holes and streaks and stuff like that into the material, and that's going to look bad if you do that. So as you can kind of see where the light is now, you can see where it looks kind of rigid, but you can also see how precise it is. It's not like it's done poorly. It's not like it's unfinishable. You can definitely make it look good. I also kind of feel like using the soldering iron is a better method than using the knife to cut away at the plastic, because if you make a wrong angle cut, or if you make too deep or too, not necessarily shallow, but if you cut in the wrong direction, it's not fixable. If you do it this way, you can just, I would say, take off the material or melt it in increments. That way, you know, if there is a little too much, you can melt it down. But remember too, if you melt too much, you're not going to get the opportunity to fix it. So make sure you do it right the first time. I'm going to finish doing this, and then I'll show you what this side looks like, and then I'll show you how to lace. Alright guys, I just wanted to show you what this side looks like whenever it's done. As you can tell, like I said many times before, it's not going to be the cleanest at first until you be able to actually take some time, finish it with maybe some, I would say probably 180 grit sandpaper. Make sure it's all nice and smooth, maybe retouch it with a little bit of paint. It's definitely pretty clean. At this distance, you can see this pretty much as perfect as you can get it, knife, soldering iron, anything like that. One thing is you can kind of see it It's not very noticeable though, the jagged edges here, but then again, like I said, you gotta take the time to fix that with some sandpaper or something along those lines. And then we're gonna do the other side, and then I'll show you how to lace, and that'll be it. And also another thing too, you're gonna want to expect a midsole dye and painting tutorial, and I'll get into the little more detail with maybe another video or like an update, something like that. That way you guys can be cued in onto what's going on. I'll be right back. Alright guys, I'm back one more time to show you the final product once you get all the cages and things cut off. I actually think that this was the cleanest side that I've done, aside from this little bit of slant right there. In my opinion, like I said, the method, instead of cutting and using the soldering iron to do the cage removal, it saves a lot of time and a lot of aggravation because you're taking away exactly what you want. And overall, to me, it's much cleaner down around where the shank ends, so like you can barely even see that, and it's going to blend in perfectly with the midsole when it's dyed and painted. Now, I did have a little bit of a technical difficulty here with this eyelet, but it's going to be covered up anyway, as you can see, and it shouldn't be too much of a problem. One thing that I highly recommend, though, like I said, make sure the shoes look clean before you start doing anything like that, and that's one thing I didn't do. But I didn't really expect to be doing this custom anyway. What I'm going to do after this actually is I'm going to do the washer tutorial, see if that actually works. I imagine that it would, as the shoe's just mesh and, I mean, whatever the boost material's made out of, foam, plastic, whatever it is. And then like the plastic shank as well. I don't really think the rubber's going to make too much of a smell or anything in the washer or dryer. One thing I would recommend, though, if you do decide to do that, make sure you take out the inner soles, or if you have replacement inner soles like I do, make sure whenever you dry these off, air dry them. Don't throw them in the dryer. It might make the prime knit shrink because of just the materials it's made out of. But overall, I would say this custom is probably about a 5 on the difficulty scale. You're not really doing anything crazy. You're just kind of removing and taking away. I would say that the hardest part and the time that you should spend the most, or the part that you should spend the most time on, is the eyelets, because if you screw up the alignment on those, you're going to have a weird looking shoe. Luckily for me, this is the first time I've done this custom. I did it pretty well. The only thing is, whenever you, if you don't really have any extra laces at the moment, the stock laces are really, really long. So I'm just going to not rock these until I get the new laces in, which shouldn't take very long, maybe just a couple days to a week. What you might want to do is just scrap the cages unless there's something else you want to use them for. I forget what that guy's name is who makes the masks out of the shoe parts and whole shoes, but I really can't give them to them because I don't know who he is or whatever. But all in all, this was a good custom. More to come. Stay tuned, subscribe, throw me some likes, comments, feedback. Let me know what you guys want to see. That way I can tailor my channel to what you guys want. Thanks. I'm out.